Ranjit, thank you for joining me on the show today.
My pleasure, Andy. All my pleasure.
Good to have you here. So, Ranjit, you are an experienced investor. You've been buying HMOs for a long time now, but you have an interesting background and some skills and experience that you have utilized to build your own portfolio and provide services to other investors. And I'm really interested to talk about this with you today and maybe draw on some of those specific skills and experiences, because I'm sure there's a lot of stuff that you know and do on a daily basis that actually our listeners really could benefit from. But just to get this kicked off, Ranjit, can you tell us a little bit more about yourself, who you are, what your background is, what led you into property, and what your business currently looks like?
So life at the moment is very different to what it was, 6 years ago. But my passion for property, you might say, or construction generally, was from quite a young age. As a teenager, looking to do a career in something. And all the lecturers were saying, oh, go and do this, go and do that. And then somebody told me about civil engineering. And I thought, what's that? And when I found out about it, it was about building bridges and roads and big stuff. It got me excited. So through my training, through my education, chartered civil engineer. So when you think of big projects out there and you complain about the roads being dug up or the sewers being blocked and stuff, that's the kind of thing I do, not to cause the problems, but to actually solve the problems. So a wonderful career in civil engineering, 30 years. But as an Indian, I'm a Sikh by faith, but an Indian by origin, I'll say you're only an Indian if you have at least 2 jobs. So alongside the employment with small consultancies and big contractors and the water company for nearly 20 years, I had a side hustle as well, which was sort of dabbling in property and drawing straight lines and curvy lines for plans and things like that. And about 5 or 6 years ago, the opportunity came where I could let go of the career, the paid employment, and go self-employed. And because I had this sort of background side hustle, there was an automatic switch over. It took a while because COVID hit and stuff, but a couple of years through, and we're a bit more settled now. On the property side, as soon as I graduated, my friend and my brother were also graduates. We put a few quid together and bought a house, wanted to buy another, but then life got in the way. We got married and we had kids and it became really difficult. So we actually sold up and upgraded our houses, upgraded our cars. We're talking 20 odd years ago. So in just a turn of the century, 2003, 2004. So we lived it up then. And it was like 10, 12 years later when we decided when the kids were a bit older and we were a bit more settled, my business partner said we should be investing in property again. So we restarted our journey in 2015, 2016. And the thing we did was HMOs. So we live here in Derby. We looked everywhere we could and decided that Derby was big enough pool for us to find our little niche. And, we've got half a dozen HMOs. Nothing exciting, nothing, to blow the numbers away. But they work for us, in different guises and different ways. And they've created a small portfolio. So that's kind of our property journey. And I've done this with a JB partner. Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that with us. And it's really nice to hear you say at the end there that actually what you've got now in terms of your portfolio, it does exactly what you need. You built what you wanted. Because I think, and I'm sure you'll agree, but you look across social media, it's very easy, isn't it, to see people doing lots of schemes, appearing really busy or maybe doing bigger schemes. And actually, I do try and remind people that just do what you need to do. Actually, it doesn't have to be an empire. A good portfolio can get you out of a job. It can give you all your time back. It can give you the freedom and flexibility to do what you want with your family, to go away. You may not necessarily want super yachts and fast cars and things. You may actually just want a bit more stability and a bit more financial independence. And it doesn't have to always be about building a huge portfolio. And I think as well, off the back of that, building big portfolios requires a very different foundation to building smaller portfolios. And I think a lot of people who start, with the wrong footing find this out later on, and it's very difficult to actually scale up. But some people try and overcomplicate the process early on. And I don't know if you've seen this, but they procrastinate a little bit. They hesitate. They set some goals that are perhaps a bit too big and they never actually get started, or actually it hinders them at the very beginning. So it's really nice to hear that you say that. And I picked up on something else that you said, Ranjit. You mentioned that property initially, or there was a bit of a side hustle. You had a job, you had a bit of a side hustle in property. Do you think that that's changed now? Do you think it's still possible to have a side hustle in property, or do you feel like actually being a property investor is more of a professional career now?
This might go against the grain. I'm going to say it's still a side hustle. Yeah. And the reason being, I have seen over the last 8, 9, 10 years, so many start and fall by the wayside. So not everyone's going to make it to that first tranche. Oh, I want to be a property sourcer. I want to have 10 HMOs by the end of the year. Those big dreams sometimes don't happen. You have to face the reality. This isn't for everyone. Those who make it, you do see the success, and that's all over social media if they choose to. The really successful ones won't be over social media. And then you have everyone in between. And a lot of those I have seen friends and people I've associated with fall by the wayside. And this sounds depressing through bankruptcy. It's exactly you said. They grew too fast, too quickly, and couldn't handle it. And when you step up, 1 property, 2 property, 3 or 4 or 5 is manageable. After that, you need systems and processes, and people don't do that. And then they get overwhelmed. They borrow too much money from people on PGs and so forth, even through senior debt, and then they can't handle it. It's very easy to make money. It's harder to handle it. So for me, I think it's a side hustle until it becomes one of many streams of income. So we train through progressive property, and that thing sticks in my head, multiple streams of income. Offset one risk against the other. Yeah.
One of the things I love about our community and the podcast is that we get to feel so many different opinions, and it's really easy when you're in your own lane to just get kind of blinkered and a bit focused on your own opinions. And it's really nice. And it's sometimes quite refreshing to hear different opinions. And actually, something that you said there, I think there is a lot of truth in it. And I think actually, in reality, there is still scope for anybody doing anything to buy property on the side. I think the bit that I'm struggling with increasingly is how restrictive that the government made some of the policies that control the lettings sector. And I think actually buying and refurbishing and and refinancing HMOs, I actually think that's the easy bit. I actually think that the hard bit is everything that comes after. And it's not the sexy bit, is it? Everybody is a bit more interested in the buying and the refurbishment and the refinancing, because that's where things can look good and you can share it and you can make a bit of money. But the management, I think, was when the real work sets in. And look, we're still, in my opinion, still quite early days with some legislation that is coming down the barrel with us and figuring out exactly how that will all work. I think another thing is it's changing. The actual marketplace itself is changing. The type of housing that people want, the behavior of tenants is changing. The restrictions on planning and things like that, they are all changing. And I think as a consequence of all of these ingredients, strategies are changing and evolving. We talked a little bit before we kicked off about where you invest. You told me 1 or 2 interesting things. I'd like to talk about that a bit more, Ranjit. You invest in Derby, don't you? And Derby, I think, has for a long time been a bit of a target for a lot of people getting into the HMO space for a lot of reasons. But perhaps that's changing now. And whilst I don't really want to pick on Derby for any particular reason, I think it's a good example at this point that actually things do evolve and change over time. And I think it's important to be aware that it's not as easy now to just put your feet up and expect for the property to go up in value and for the rent to just keep coming in and keep all your profits. It's changing a little bit. But tell us about Derby. Tell us about how the market there has changed and how you have been adapting your model to those changes.
That's some great points there. The landscape is changing, legislation and so forth. If I just touch on a higher level sort of economic thing, the UK is at a point now where youngsters, I'm thinking people your age and younger, are thinking, I'm never going to be able to afford to buy a house. And therefore, they're thinking of renting for a long time is becoming the norm. The market is adapting to that. And the legislation that came in 5 or 6 years ago was, when we saw it then, the tax changes, the Section 24 rules on personal income, on property and mortgage relief and so forth. Those we could see then. So if you looked in the bigger picture then, it was about making sure the housing stock was still available and knowing that the individual landlord, the small landlords, couldn't actually provide the capacity. And that's why people like Lloyd's, Marks and Spencer's, or these big organizations are now thinking about mass market rental properties. So that's the economics at the macro level. And that reflects in Derby. So Derby, we looked around 8, 9 years ago, thinking, where shall we invest? Where's the cheapest place? And cheap isn't always good quality. And then we looked at Stoke, Sheffield, Nottingham, maybe a little bit further Doncaster Hallway. And in the end, we found that actually on your doorstep is probably the best place. It's nearby. You've got low overheads in travel and so forth, management. And there's a big enough pool if you know what you want. So we invested in Derby, and back then there was no restrictions, there were very few restrictions. We cast ourselves 5 or 10 years ahead and worked backwards. So we put some things in place where we have got properties in our names, we've got properties in limited companies. So we kind of got the balance to be there or thereabouts, where you're not feeling the pain with the changes in one area to the other. So it's splitting the risk. But with every city, the local economy is, yes, we like all this activity, but a few people complain. The politicians get a bit, worked up about outside investors or whoever suddenly turning, their nice areas into ghettos. So they start thinking about how to bring legislation in. So we've got Article 4 coming into Derby next year. So a couple of years ago, we saw this and we said, right, that's it. There's too many people coming in. The cost of properties to purchase and to refurb is now sky high. So yeah, I'd still see people, buying £150,000 property, spending another 150k on it, 300k in, 450,000 pound valuation. Great, get your money out. So we don't do that model. We saw through the COVID, we nearly got rinsed. We had 50% occupancy, and that was just enough to keep bills paid. So if you're looking to use HMOs as a strategy for passive income, etc., build in a COVID factor. Build in something that'll take out 50% of your income. Yeah. See, the margins, but people at the moment are running on very tight margins, and it's worrying. Yeah, it's very worrying. But if you can manage that risk, great, get through it. So what we're finding now is Derby, people are now just saying, oh, wish Derby got Article 4 coming, where should we go next? So the investors or people who want to make money, whatever you want to call loan sharks, whoever, they're moving on to newer pastures, okay? And there's a lot of, I'll do this HMO and sell it. So people are investing, doing them up and selling them. And they're ready-made deals, but just do your due diligence, know your figures. If you had to sell that £400,000 valued house at, 180,000, 200,000, would you get the sale? Yeah, is there a big enough market for the HMO resale market? So there are some risks and stuff. But Derby, it's getting to be like everywhere else now. Article 4 is going to come in. So advice I'm giving people is, it's a bit of cloak and dagger now for a few months. After that, when it comes in, the rules are the rules. But between now and then, try and get your properties tenanted. 3 or more people tenanted, you've got HMO use established. Get that in the bag, whatever means it takes, reasonably and legally. And then you're in a good place. So, adapt to the change. The change is always going to be there. Adapt to the change.
I've seen this happen in a number of cities over those 15 and 20 years that I've been investing. It's happened in a number of cities where I've been investing. I think that the first reaction is one of disappointment. All of a sudden, there's a barrier, there's an obstacle. It's much harder to buy what we want. And inevitably what that does is it creates a bit of a buying frenzy initially. Everyone rushes out to get something, but it also starts to push prices up, and there is a fundamental, a physiologic change in the asset values in that location. And I've seen this really scare people to the extent that they have decided to go and invest elsewhere. And that I find that quite sad as well, because I think from my own experience, Article 4s can be a good thing. Once an Article 4 direction is in place, so long as it's not come into force too late, it limits the supply. Actually, it puts a control on that type of business operation. And this is just my opinion, but if your objective is long-term, you've got long-term goals of holding onto assets, generating good cash flow, that stands you in really good stead. It's like, I've talked a number of times on the show to people about this, but it's like having an ice cream shop down by the seaside and the council saying, look, we're happy for you to do this. And actually what we're going to do is we're going to make sure that there aren't many other people that can do this as well. That's fantastic as a business. And some of the stuff that you said, talking about having contingencies in your business so that if there is a black swan event or things change like legislation, taxes, things that make it more difficult to extract profits from our business, it still works. And I think all of that, and for me, and I suppose circling back around to my question to you earlier about the side hustle piece, I think this is why I think more and more that investing in HMOs is becoming more of a profession that you have to really take a lot of time and thought to understand, because it's quite easy to see on a surface level, Article 4 directions coming in, it no longer works, the prices have changed. And yes, it's going to have an impact. And yes, that could be perceived as a detrimental impact initially. But I think there certainly are advantages. And I think approaching this whole process like a business is really important, and perhaps more important than ever. I mean, You've taken some of your skills from your civil engineering background, haven't you, Ranjit? And actually, you've got an architectural design consultancy. Is that right?
That's right, yeah.
You've got skills that perhaps some other people don't have, but that perhaps gives you an advantage in other ways. Article 4 direction and planning, that's obviously something that you are challenged with. But what other challenges do you see from a planning perspective, perhaps more specifically, and how are you able to use your skills to overcome some of those challenges?
I think in any background that you come from, so whatever your origin was, as in terms of your career-wise, there are always transferable skills. Okay, so if you've been an accountant, managing money should come fairly easy to you. With my background in engineering construction, the ability to see the end product and to plan to land the plane on the penny.
Yeah.
So the ability to get to the end target with little variation to what you set out, that's my skill set. So I can do that fairly. I can see the end product, space design it, and financially land it there or thereabouts.
Is that a process of reverse engineering for you, Ranjit, when you're taking all of these things into consideration, planning challenges, budgets, specifications, timelines? Do you start with the end in mind?
Absolutely. So in any project, there's time, cost, and quality. So if you know the quality of the product you want, you can set the time and the cost associated with that. But my civil engineering, when you're when you're planning to spend £20 million on a project, you can't be 20, 30 or 40 million. It's got to be 20 million, give or take $500,000. So you've got to plan. So there's an old adage about if you fail to plan, you plan to fail. So without that plan in place, and quite often people say, yeah, let's get it, and we'll start the refurb. And the number of conversations I have to start at the end of the game. So what do you want to do at the end of it? It's quite different to what they're thinking now. And we sort of plan it backwards and say, right, that's the end game. Let's now pick the best route to get there. And it may not require planning now. So currently I'm telling people, nice house, liquor paint, maybe change electric, put some fire safety in, and get 3 or 4 tenants in there. Get it up and running as a HMO. You had to secure your rights. So the end game, and then what we can do, this conversation this morning was, we can build an annex, just attach us to it. All you need to do is now put a door in, so we can build it separately and just add another extra room by going down the planning route of planning permissions and so forth. That word of planning, reverse engineering, as you said, that is a skill I think everyone should learn. And if you don't know it, then get someone on board who can see that. Yeah.
I think that's a really great bit of advice. And sometimes I'm not sure people know exactly what they need to know. And if they do know, who can even help them? We talked very briefly before we kicked off as well about some other planning challenges like listed buildings, conservation areas. These are the sorts of projects that you're tackling on a regular basis. How do you overcome those sorts of challenges, Ranjit? And what sort of advice could you share for anybody looking at projects that might also be constrained by these similar factors?
So when you run any business, particularly in property, I think I've boiled it down. There are 21 skill sets you need to be aware of on the end-to-end property business, from finding a deal to then renting it out. There are 21 roles you play. And as an individual, you cannot play 21 roles. You can't be the accountant, the solicitor, etc., etc. So you've got to find people who can fill those gaps for you. Either people that you seek advice from on a free or paid basis, or people that you associate within, mastermind groups, property meetings, etc. Your go-to guys, your go-to girls, that you can get that bit of information, which just allows the fog to clear a bit, and you can see beyond the end of next month or something. So when it comes to raising finance, you want the exits. We take more due diligence up front to make sure we have an exit that's not guaranteed, but as guaranteed as possible. What you don't want is buy in a rush, and then you come to refinance, they say, oh, well, this got some movement over there, some cracks over there, which you ignored, or there is something else associated with that property which the mortgage lender doesn't like. So think about, that end game and work backwards. And some of the classical things like grade 2 listed buildings, we're working on one at the moment. It's 12 months in planning. As we're chatting this morning, chatting before we came on, there's an email pinged which I've got to read. In the first lines, it flashes that was a bit more hopeful, optimistic. So I'm hoping we've almost got that one over the line, but that's taken 12 months plus. And we had to call in a heritage specialist to give us the grade 2 sort of impact report. I've had to change the plan 3 or 4 times. And so you've got to sometimes capitulate, sometimes you've got to fight, but it's knowing what the rules are. So grade 2 listed building, grade listed building is hard. Grade 2 listed, grade 2 star listed is even harder, but not impossible. Right people around you will get you through the process. It'll cost a bit more money, but these tend to be grand buildings, so the finances will be bigger as well. It'll cost more to do, but you'll probably get a higher GDV, better rental rates, etc. So, don't try and squash shoeboxes into a grade 2 building.
I think that the key thing that you said there for me is that you need to know what to do. You don't necessarily have to be the person that does it. And these consultants that you can outsource, services to impact assessments that you mentioned, you can do designs, drawing and architectural studies, those sorts of things. There's a lot of moving parts to projects. And I think I don't know how you feel about this, but I think as Article 4 direction becomes more of a mainstay across the country, and I can see to a point in time where pretty much everything is under, or in fact, they just remove the permitted development right to convert residential into HMOs. I think it's increasingly important to understand that there are different types of limitations and unique obstacles that can actually, with the right approach, present themselves as opportunities. But it's just understanding what you need to do. And the fact that, like you said, these projects will take a lot longer in planning. So that has to be built into the timeline. That has to be built in to the cost and the budget. It's going to cost more to get it from A to B. But I do think that these sorts of projects are going to be increasingly on our radar, as naturally the supply of pretty sort of cookie cutter type of stock does to some extent start to disappear. And I do think that will happen, particularly in the prime areas.
Absolutely. If I can just chip in there, the rules change. You change to suit the rules. Learn the rules. It's as simple as that in many ways. And Article 4, I get a bit flippant about it. There's politicians sort of election winner, which it commonly is, and in Derby it has been for all the political parties. But actually, you look at the communities that the HMOs are predominantly in, and those communities have changed. So you've got to control the proliferation of HMOs, or as I said, the wild west of HMOs, unrestricted development of HMOs. Because if you've got a whole street of HMOs, every summer they're going to be empty if they're students, or if they're professional areas, there's going to be a different kind of feel to it. So I think politicians are doing the right thing of trying to maintain some sort of community feel in the area by just spreading the HMOs out a bit. That's all they're trying to do, and that's what the rules are geared up for. So rather than have 3 or 4 in a row, they can spread them out a bit. They're broken up. They're still there, because the need will always be there. Yeah.
My opinion on Article 4 directions, generally speaking, I am in favour of them. They've helped me build really good, very robust businesses that are really valuable, quite rare and protected. And that's unique in business, and it's definitely unique in the real estate space. I think combined with good location, good service provision, good specification, and a really good understanding of what you need to do, I think that is a great recipe for business success, but it does need to be taken, I think, quite seriously. We talked a little bit about economics before we kicked off, and I want to get your opinion on this, Ranjit. You've been doing this a long time, but the way that I want to ask you what you think is a good deal looks like, first of all. When you're looking at HMOs, I think a lot of our listeners love the answer, love hearing the answer to this question. And the reason I like asking it is because it is different for everybody, but what does a good deal look like to you, Ranjit, and why?
Okay, so when we all start off, the only deal around that should be a deal or that stacks up is one that gives you infinite return. Okay, but those come very rarely, and you're very highly leveraged on those. So for us, I mean, on a HMO, it's going to be at least double-digit yield. Okay, post costs, post mortgages, and so forth. So if you need to leave money in, you need to leave money in. That's just the economics. You're investing. You're an investor, which means you've got to have funds to invest. So you're going to have to leave some money in. If the deal stacks up, you got it at a cracking price, and you manage to get the refurb done really, really well and cheap or low cost, then you might have some headroom. But all our deals, we've got a little bit of money left in, and that's fine, because that money could give us another project. Risk is bigger. We could put it in the bank, but if it's giving us double-digit returns, what's the problem? And normally it's 15%. I would look as a minimum. 25% used to be the norm.
Is that 15% on your capital invested?
Capital invested, yes. So capital employed, we look for 25% on capital employed.
Yeah.
But with the changing market and so forth, it's probably more like 15% now.
That is so refreshing for me to hear, because I couldn't agree more. Whenever I answer this question, I always put 15% return on capital employed down as a pretty good benchmark towards. If you were buying something off the shelf, that might be more like 12%. If you
Yep.
can find a way of engineering some good value into it, perhaps you can convert a garage, go into the loft, do a rear extension, or perhaps you can just buy it at a good value and add value through refurbishing what exists. You can engineer that value up. But one of the things that I've seen so many times is expectations being set so high about the amount of capital that can be or should be recycled out of a deal because the intention is to go on to do the next one. But because they are so limiting those investment criteria for some people in some locations and at certain times of the year, they end up never doing the first deal. So the second deal certainly never happens, which is really disappointing. And it's just really refreshing to hear people like you, Ranjit, give your impression on this is what a good deal looks like. And actually, it's okay to leave money in. Ideally, we wouldn't. I think we can all unanimously agree on that. We'd like to get a bit more money out of the deal, but it doesn't mean it's a bad deal.
Well, give it 3 years. If you can't go the speed you want to go at, 10 in a year, one every 10 years might be too slow, but you might do one every 2 or 3 years. If it's the funds, it's your own funds or it's very close funds. And if you say, I don't know, this argument says, so we've got typical deals. We bought at about 120k. So in Derby at the time, you can buy from 120k a mid-terrace, end terrace, or a sort of medium-sized terrace, 80, 90 square meters, or a semi of the same sort of 100 square meter semi. We were typically spending, 80, 90k at the time. In round terms, we were about 200k in. And those properties on commercial, semi-commercial valuations, 5-bed HMOs, my business partner said, we're not doing 6, 7, 8-bed HMOs because then you get a different clientele. So the 4s and 3s, 4s and 5s we've got aren't sexy, but they turn over. So those, I think, were 200k in. They're valued at 275. They might be a bit more now, but we must have left 50k in, 150k out on the borrowing. And we were happy with that. Here's the other thing that we sort of risked. So my civil engineering was about risk management. How do you deal with or deliver a £20 million projects to within a percent or two? So we said, look, okay, we fix the mortgage for 5 years, and then there are some costs that come in unforeseen. How do you build those in? And also, we wanted our mortgage exposure not to be above a certain percentage or a certain value. We fixed it, I think, 600 or 650 a month, so interest only. So not about getting the lowest rate and maximum money out. Sometimes you get a higher rate, but take a little less out, and you look at the overall picture. And for us, it was about balancing that. If there was a problem, how much liability would we have with an empty property, the black swan event? And so we said that there'll be no more than 1.5 rooms rent. I think it roughly worked out at the time, or would be the mortgage we want to maximize that per month. Then you kind of do a very strange equation backwards. Well, what can I borrow on based on that amount that we want to pay, happy to pay out up to? And it just happened to be, 60%, 50%, 70%, whatever the percentage was, we left some money in the deal.
There's some good advice in there. And again, it's nice to hear how you interpret what a good deal looks like to you, and also the pragmatic approach to investing in real estate in the UK, which is to take a long-term view on most things. I think it's a really good piece of advice to look at just fixing in for long periods, even if you know that that's not likely to be the cheapest solution. What it does is it gives you a certain degree of predictability. And I think to keep it really, really simple and to remove a lot of the worry and concern that comes with investing, particularly in HMOs, if you can do that, in the worst case, so long as you are in a good location where you have a great deal of rental confidence, so you have done all of your research and you know exactly what the going rate for rents are, where you'll be in the market, a little bit like selling your car on Auto Trader, you know exactly where your room is on that listing, who's going to be above you, who's going to be below you, and you price everything just right and it's in a desirable location relative to the value that you're offering. It is still such a simple model. And no, you might not get all your capital out. Yes, you might leave a bit more in the deal, but you will be okay. And it'll probably, in a few years' time, all be forgotten about. You'll have moved on. You'll have probably got the experience to raise a bit of finance to do the next deal. And that is how so many people actually do build really good property businesses.
Slow and steady wins the race. I've always grown up with that. There was a funny thing, just digressing a bit. There was a video I shared recently on Facebook. It was actually a literal race between a tortoise and a hare. And they had up 2 lanes. And you're not going to believe it, but the tortoise won. A real race between a hare and a tortoise. The hare went so far, stopped, and just stopped looking around. The tortoise just plodded along and got to the end line first. And I was like, that's me. I like that. So the harsh reality of the fable is the reality is true as well. So if you go at your pace, you don't have to copy anyone else. Your pace is your pace. And you may want 3 really high-end HMOs. Fine, go for that. Or 20 cheaper versions. But think about the money, because the money's got to be working for you. Yeah, it's great having 20 properties, but if they're costing you an arm and a leg, and you haven't got the finances, you're borrowing money. If you're borrowing from investor B to pay investor A, that's not the right way to do it. And that's where people get caught up. They get to scale. They try to scale up too quickly without the skill sets around them. Letting agents, we've never let a property. We use agents. There's cost associated, but we get the advice for free. So we'll phone up Ollie and say, Ollie, we're looking to do this one. What do you reckon? He goes, yeah, do this really top end of that area. He goes, you don't want it all. You might say, you're not going to get the clientele of that £700 a room. This is more like a £500 a room rent area. And the market at the moment is what people are looking for. Yeah. So if you're going to be ready in the next 4 or 5 months, that's the market now, not the market from yesterday. So we may temper it down a bit, maybe push it up a bit. So student lets, we don't do more than three bed student lets, because the advice we were given, we spoke to student specialists, who did student lettings, was students like 3 and 4 bed properties. They like to be in small groups. And I hark back to my university days, we stayed in a flat, 3 of us. Yeah, 2 of us shared a room. One got the single room, we had the large double room, and it worked out, and that was quite nice. So if you're 6 of you, 7 of you, 8 of you in the house, I don't know how that would work. The dynamics are quite different.
I think there's a couple of things there. I think part of it, in my experience, is definitely location dependent. Sometimes depends on the actual type of housing, areas and towns and cities where there's historically a lot of workers type of housing, terraced housing that's a bit more squeezed. I've seen people try and squeeze 5-6 bedrooms into those sorts of properties, and it does create for quite a limited living experience. But I think you are also right in that people's attitudes are generally changing. Most people are not looking to live in a house with lots and lots of people. They would have given the choice, prefer to live in a house with fewer people. And I think that is in some ways dictating the market, but certainly on a local level, dictating things. And you said it yourself, and I think I'm going to coin this because I really, really like it. Good investing doesn't have to be sexy. Often isn't sexy. It's just about making smart decisions and just doing it consistently.
Yeah, finding your lane and then saying, we'll stick to it. A bit of advice I got was, you may have heard of a chap called Grant Cardone.
I have. The 10X guy.
Guru, yeah, over in the States. So we're going back 5, 6, 7 years ago. So I did a little bit of a side venture in IT with a chap called Darren from up in Liverpool way. And we hit it off, and we decided we're going to do something. And along that journey, we were going to an event in London. So this is an event hosted by Nick James of Expert Empires. Just give me a shout out to them, because these people have played a role in just showing me the past. And we got wind that Grant Cardone was coming to this event. So Darren turns to me, just chatting stupidly. He goes, let's interview him. And we were thinking, on the day, we'll try and get 5-10 minutes. Obviously, Nick's paying him a lot of money to come over. We put this thought out there, and within a week, we had Grant Cardone video cast into my lounge for an hour, and we just called up 20 people, friends. So we've got Grant Cardone lined up for an interview on Friday. Can you join us? So we had this this desire to interview him in London for 10 minutes, turned into an hour with him. My takeaway from there was anything is possible if you focus on it, but what he said somebody asked him a question about, you must have carried lots of risk. He goes, when we look at deals, we de-risk everything. Yeah. The only risks which are left are the ones we know about and we can quantify. So, and that was like profound. I thought, we talk about taking risks. Actually, is, I think you said earlier, calculated risks, it's measured risks. It's knowing what the worst case scenario could be and then planning for it. If you think the interest rate might double in the next 12 months, build that into your purchase price. Yeah. Or build into your room rents, build into the number of rooms you put in the house, etc. So again, reverse engineering back, but it was quite profound that, try and de-risk or, eliminate risk if you can. If not, then de-risk it and be mindful of all the risks and quantify them.
Thanks for sharing that story, Ranjit. I think it's one of the fundamental principles, isn't it, of good business and real estate investing is finding ways to mitigate and reduce those risks. And there are so many ways. Can you remove it all entirely? No, there's always a point at which you have to take that leap of faith, but hopefully it's not a particularly big leap, and hopefully you already know what you would do if, in the worst case, things didn't quite pan out. How you would get out of the deal, or how you would pay that investor, or what you would do if the valuation didn't come in. That's really just the basics of good planning. And again, I think, and go back to what you said earlier, starting with the end in mind, reverse engineering that deal to the offer that you make and moving forwards from that point is a really good, very sound approach to buying properties and certainly buying HMOs. Ranjit, it's been a real pleasure having you on the show today. I think we've meandered through a number of different topics, and it's been interesting to get your insights and experience and opinions on a number of things. And for anyone listening today that might want to reach out to you, where's the best place to contact you?
That's a real good question. I haven't got an answer for this one, other than I do a bit of stuff on social media. I mean, I don't run training programs and things like I used to do some mentorships. We might launch something in the future, but if you want to connect, go through Facebook, Ranjit Seehra, as it is on the title there. Just drop me a direct message. I've got too many friend requests. Unless I know you, I won't friend you, as I say. But if you want to connect, go through Messenger, drop me a direct message, and we can connect that way, and I can bring you a bit closer because you made the effort to go and find out a bit more about me. If I can help people, you'll see me on Facebook and Twitter and places like that, dropping advice in and just helping people, either avoid mistakes, or at least be aware of the hurdles that they're going to come across as they go along on their journey. See the unknown unknowns. Somebody knows about them.
Ranju, thanks again. It's been an absolute pleasure. It's been great to catch up with you and have you on the show today. And very much looking forward to seeing what you go on to do in the property space.
Thank you very much, Andy. It's been my pleasure. All the best. Thank you.